absence of saline water has enraged the wildebeest's thirst. The exhausted animals search the dry lake bed for traces of fresh water, a search that will take them the rest of their lives. Man has unsuccessfully tried to preserve wild animals for aesthetic reasons, and so they continue to be destroyed in the face of growing commercial needs. The destruction of the wildebeest is not exceptional. It is the fate of all wild animals that have attempted to share the Earth's resources with man or stood in the way of his insatiable greed. Much of Africa may well be dying like the wildebeest. Only time will tell. But what is certain is that man and Africa's indigenous animals are at the end of an era. It is at this moment that one is able to glimpse both fragments of the past and the shape of things to come. The plight of Botswana's wildebeest has not gone undocumented. Renowned wildlife researcher Dr. Doug Williamson was studying the wildebeest at Lake Dow. Williamson explains.
As far as I can see, wildlife has very little future in this area because they have to compete directly with cattle for water and for grazing and with people for space. And more people are moving into the area, cattle numbers are building up. And the result is that conditions are steadily deteriorating, so that a situation arose last year in which more than 50,000 wildebeest died. And what you see right here is the mortal remains of several hundred wildebeest.
The tragedy here at Lake Dow is only one of the many similar events made possible by cattle development programs in these arid areas. The foreign development agencies that finance the African governments and encourage them to expand their commercial cattle programs are unlikely to ever get a fraction of their investment paid back. Hardly retribution for the senseless destruction of a country's most valuable resource, productive land. In Botswana, the grasslands continue to vanish at an unprecedented rate. and so more land is opened up to replace the overgrazed range. 10 years ago, this was grassland. Now it is desert. The association between environmental collapse and human suffering is well illustrated. 10 years ago, the country's people could feed themselves. Now, over 65% of them depend on food aid handouts. And while Botswana's government exports beef to Europe, more of its people become destitute. Colonial settlers started commercial cattle ranching here in East Africa at the end of the last century. This land belongs to David Hopcraft. His family has been ranching for many years. Cattle ranching in Africa is plagued by many problems. Cattle are extremely vulnerable to local disease. Commercial cattle ranching is only made feasible here because of veterinary technology, and the animals must be regularly treated with drugs and dips to protect them from disease and parasites, an expensive and time-consuming task. Cattle are particularly susceptible to disease carried by ticks. Ticks burrow down into their skins. At certain times of the year, cattle are so infested with ticks they must be dipped 3 or even 4 times a week, or they sicken and die. In some areas, the cattle live over half their lives in stockades, being protected from natural predators or undergoing dippings, inoculations, or some other form of veterinary program. Valuable time is expended here, time that animals should be out on the range, feeding. Multinational developers and local governments vigorously support most commercial cattle programs. They subsidize the massive infrastructure that supports cattle. Here, good money is thrown after bad. As efforts increase to support the beef industry, more land turns to desert. Dr. David Hopcraft explains.
These are the animals that man has chosen to replace all wildlife. They originate in the temperate regions of Europe and Asia, and so in Africa are at great disadvantage, being adapted to neither the local diseases nor the dry land conditions. Increasing technology is required to keep them alive, to meet man's growing needs.
For Hopcraft, cattle ranching became progressively less profitable over the years as his rangeland became more overgrazed. Hopcraft's common sense and his training as a wildlife research scientist made the choice obvious, and he started to ranch wild animals. When he began this venture, Hopcraft had hoped to produce as much from the wild animals as he had from cattle, but without wounding the land so deeply. What he had not expected was the discovery that Africa's game animals could be a more productive and profitable venture than cattle.
Here we're ranching wildlife rather than cattle, and we've been studying the system for 20 years. Throughout the worst drought in memory, we've been harvesting the game and in good condition. The remaining cattle on the ranch have suffered very badly, despite good management. And many of the ranches around us have been wiped out, with thousands of cattle dying. And with the rains coming, they're getting increased erosion and devastation. Here, under the wildlife regime, the vegetation